Hey guys, I know I already made a video like this where I showed the equipment that I used for just the first David Gilmour video, but I thought it might be fun to make a more thorough video where I show you all of the equipment that I use for all of my music and all of my videos. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with my number one guitar. This is a parts caster made from Warmouth parts. So the neck is roasted maple, and the body is roasted alder because I'm a real Strat guy at heart. The pickups are neck and bridge, the whole lot of humbucker from Seymour Duncan, which is their, we're not contractually allowed to use Jimmy Page's name, but this is based on a pickup we've made for Jimmy Page humbucker. And the middle single coil is their Antiquity 2 Surfer Strat, which is kind of like their attempt at trying to capture the best of all of the 1960s Stratocasters, which is my favorite era of Strats. The controls are a little interesting in the sense that this tone control, which normally controls the neck pickup on a Strat, instead controls both the middle and bridge pickups on this Strat, since that's where I spend most of my time, and then this tone control is for the neck pickup. And also it's got the vintage 6-screw tremolo system with 5 screws in back. And here we have a guitar that I only recently got back after having it heavily modified. This is a 2018 or 2019 Sterling by Music Man John Petrucci signature 7-string. And the Sterling models are a little bit more stripped down than their Music Man counterparts to make them more affordable. But I recently had this thing heavily modified, so the first thing I had them do was block the tremolo so it only goes down, it's not floating anymore, and I like it that way in case I break a string, the whole guitar doesn't go out of tune. Next thing I did was I had them disconnect the preamp, because I just use overdrive pedals, I don't need a preamp in my guitar, but I kept the push knob. What that does now is it splits the coils of the pickup, so if I'm in the middle position where it's both pickups and I split it, I can get a real Stratty sound, which I didn't used to like, but I'm a big fan of it now. And then with the tone knob, I had them replace the capacitor that was wired to it, so now the value matches what's in my number one guitar. And the pickups also got switched out. It came with black pickups, which I thought looked super ugly against this beautiful kind of red finish. And they also didn't sound good, in addition to not looking good, so I replaced it with DiMarzio pickups. This is a PAF7 in the neck, and a Super Distortion 7 in the bridge. And I'm not usually a fan of high output pickups, but the reason why I put it in this guitar was because this is kind of the guitar, even though it's not my number one, that I bring with me to a gig where I'm not 100% sure what I've gotten myself into. So having something with an extended upper range with the extra frets and lower range with the extra string just means that I can cover a lot of ground, I never have to retune or anything, and it's just very helpful. This guitar has an interesting story behind it. So this is a 1970s pre-lawsuit era L Degas. It's hard to see, but it says L before the Degas on the headstock. And I think it was made in Japan, but I can't confirm that, only because it has a lot of similarities to the Ibanez's and Aria Pro 2s of the time. But I'm guessing that this was a much smaller brand, since I have literally only seen 1 or 2 other guitars online with this brand name on it. And the way I came by this very old, very neat guitar was when I was working at Sam's Club. I had a co-worker whose late husband played guitar, and she was looking to sell some of them, so when I saw this thing, being a big Tony Iommi and Eric Clapton fan, I just kind of had to have it, and I put the little Grateful Dead lightning bolt sticker on it after I got it, and I paid more for it than I probably should have, but I was happy to because it's in really good shape. And this bridge pickup, I am 99% sure is a DiMarzio Super Distortion from the 1970s, because it's not coil splittable, and it's certainly not an old X2N, because then it would have rail style pickups. So by process of elimination, it kind of has to be a super distortion because it says DiMarzio USA on back. And I keep this little piece of sponge behind the bridge to mute the strings there. And I don't know what the neck pickup is. It says like HMK on back or something like that, and I just hate the way it sounds, so if it's not valuable, I am probably going to throw it out, but if it is valuable, I will keep it. But one thing's for sure, I am taking it out of the neck position on this guitar because it does not sound good. Whenever you see me using this guitar, it's always going to be in the bridge position, and I like using it mainly for rhythm guitar, although it does do some really nice lead guitar sounds. And here we have one of my favorite guitars, and it's very singular among the guitars that I own because it is one of a kind. So the backstory behind this guitar is that my dad is a dentist, and the person who made this guitar was one of my dad's patients. So when he heard that I played guitar, he gave this guitar to my dad so that I could play it and decide if I like it. As you can see, it's very unique. It's not made to my specifications, but I love it all the same. And so I played it and immediately loved it even before I even plugged it in. And so it was very expensive, but I paid for it slowly over time. And I kind of think of this thing the way that you might think of like a really old Telecaster, in the sense that like the bridge pickup is almost too bright to necessarily be useful. It does like a very specific thing, and I don't use the bridge pickup in this guitar very often because it's not right for a lot of the music that I make. And then the neck pickup is like the polar opposite of the bridge pickup. It's dark, but it's not muddy. And it's fat and it's clear. It's probably my favorite sounding neck pickup. And I'm pretty sure that they were custom wound for this guitar. They were just called hex buckers on the spec sheet, whereas I've known this builder to use Seymour Duncans in the past, but I don't think that these are Duncans. And then I would tell you the guy's name, but the thing is he doesn't make guitars anymore. This was one of the last guitars he ever made. So I don't want anyone who sees this video to try and contact him and like harass him into making a guitar, because as far as I know he's done and he's not interested in making any more guitars. But those are his initials, EJ. And so sometimes when people ask what the EJ stands for, I make up a story about how before he had a signature model, Eric Johnson commissioned a custom guitar that he didn't really like, and so it changed hands a few times until it came into my possession. But that's just a story I like to make up. This guitar was never owned by Eric Johnson. EJ is the initials of the guy who made it. And then lastly, we have my Ovation Acoustic. I don't remember what this specific model's called, but you can buy them used for like $350, $400. And it does what I need it to do. I don't play a lot of acoustic, so this is really just something that I strum at home sometimes when I'm trying to figure out a song, and I don't necessarily want to go through all the trouble of like plugging in an electric guitar. I just pick this thing up, it's usually in tune, and I just strum a few chords, figure out a song, and that's it. I don't use this guitar too much. It was a gift, but I do like it. Not much to say about this bass. This is a 2018 or 2019 Mexican-made 5-string Fender jazz bass. The only difference is that I play it with a high B, because number one, I'm a guitar player, and if you've listened to the backing tracks in any of my videos or any of my original music on my YouTube channel or my Bandcamp, you'll know that I write some very melodic bass lines that often juxtapose the high and low registers of the bass, so using a higher string, whether it's a high B or a high C, is just better suited to the music I'm writing right now, and it's all stock. So this keyboard is kind of a new addition to the studio. It's been in my family for decades, which is why it has these stickers on it. I put them on like over 10 years ago when I couldn't play piano, and I'm just too lazy to take them off. And it's not like a professional keyboard, it's a toy keyboard, but it's interesting because it's a Yamaha from the 80s, and some of the sounds are actually pretty good. Like, I do like the electric piano sound. So I use it with that sound a lot, and so if I want, sometimes I use the headphone output jack to connect it to an amplifier or my audio interface. So you can expect to see and hear this in my future music and future videos. And now moving into amp land here. The thing I use for most rhythm guitars is this Vox MV50 Clean. For those who remember back a couple years ago when Vox launched these, they have this weird thing in them called a new tube, which isn't actually a tube, but they claim works and sounds like a tube. That's up for debate, but I think that this amp sounds pretty good, so I use it for mostly clean sounds and rhythm guitar sounds where I think it does a good job. And the reason why it's on top of a towel is because this guy on YouTube called the Guitologist, that's the name of his channel, when Vox launched these products, they sent him some new tubes and some special circuit boards to test them with, and he found that they were very microphonic. And so if you listen to my song Cheesecake Sunset, at the beginning there's this frequency that sounds like feedback, but I think it's actually microphonics from the new tube. So I usually put this amp on top of some foam or a towel or something to isolate it from some of the vibrations, since it is on top of the speaker cabinet and everything. And so far it's worked like a charm. If I want to use the JTM45 clone, all I do is take the amp and the towel off the top so that the tubes from the big amp can vent, and it's an imperfect solution, but as of right now it's working. And since I don't need to switch amps very often, or I just record different amps on different days, I don't have a problem with it. And that brings us to this amp. I got this amp when I graduated from high school, and I put a little Warmouth sticker next to the power switch to match my Warmouth parts caster, and it is an all-tube JTM45 clone. See, JTM45. And most of the time I use it in channel 2. I find channel 1 to be a little bit too bright, and the way I'm able to get distorted tones out of this amp without shattering a window or blowing out my eardrums is that I have a power attenuator down here that the amp goes through before going to the speaker cabinet. So depending on what I'm doing, I'll find the sweet spot on the power attenuator to really crank the volume on the amplifier. That being said, it's really not good for these amps to drive the power tubes because, you know, they can blow out and take other components with them when that happens. So at the time of recording this, I'm saving up my money to have some mods done to this thing, and I'm gonna keep the specific mods I have in mind a secret, that way I can make a video about it in the future. Below that is a Roland JC40, so I use this mainly for clean guitar sounds, and usually when I'm looking for a different type of clean than what the Vox MV50 has going on. The Vox is very Fendery, ironically, but you might be able to guess that from the silver faceplate. It's a very kind of clean, scoopy, Fendery kind of sound. Whereas with this thing, like with the JC40, I wouldn't say it does anything specific. It's not a Voxy or a Fendery or a Marshall or an Orange kind of clean sound. It's just when I'm looking for something different, or maybe something a little bit brighter. It has 10-inch speakers in it, so it's less boomy and bassy than the orange cab. Anything going through the orange cab is going to be. So sometimes when I need a rhythm guitar sound that I just need to sit in the mix and nothing else is cutting it, I go to the jazz chorus. And so then the only thing left is the speaker cabinet, which is completely stock. It's an orange closed back 212 with the Chinese Celestian Vintage 30s. And in the last video I said that I recorded pretty much all of my amplifiers with my condenser mic, and I keep plastic bags on all my mics to keep dust off of the diaphragm. But since then I've experimented a bit, and I'm really liking the SM57 now where I didn't before, and I found that just by moving it off center of the speaker cone, I got a much better sound. Now that I've discovered that, I'm not sure if I'm ever gonna mic center cone on a speaker ever again. And to make it even easier to set up, I mean, I've got this mic stand set up the way I need it for this specific cabinet, but if I have to use a different stand, I've made a couple of little black dots where the edge of the speaker is. That way I can easily kind of visually estimate where I want to put the mic. I know immediately when it's on center and off center by just looking at where the mic is in relation to those dots. And then for my bass amplifier, I never mic this amp, but this is a Fender Rumble 100. Sometimes what I do is I use the XLR output on back and feed it into my PreSonus preamp so it goes through all of this other processing, and I get a really fat direct bass sound that sounds like an amped bass sound even though it's actually a direct sound. It's a really clever trick that I use, but I don't do it all the time because sometimes I'm looking for a more traditional direct bass sound. And then I just keep all of my pedals unplugged in front of the speaker cabinet because I never use more than 1 or 2 at a time, and when I do use 2 at a time it's always one of the dirt boxes and the Wah Wah. So starting with the Wah, this is a Vox, I don't remember the name of it, but it's their hand wired one, and I love the way it sounds. That's not true. I hate the way it sounds when I play it in the room, but when I listen back to it on recordings, it sounds perfect. The only thing that's annoying about it is that it's 9-volt battery only, so I'm gonna have this wah pedal modded at some point to accept a 9-volt power supply. Next to that, the white pedal is the Earthquaker Devices Dispatch Master, which is a delay reverb 2-in-1 pedal, and I really don't use it much anymore because I found that it just doesn't sound good with the Marshall. I tried it in the loop, don't like it, tried it in the front, didn't like that either, and I just find that it kind of covers up my playing. I really like to hear all of the details in my playing, so I don't use any reverb anymore unless I'm going for something really specific that calls for reverb. Next to that is the TC Electronic Mojomojo. This is the first pedal I ever got, and I got it used, so I don't know if it's modified or if it's stock, but I actually use it for a lot of rhythm guitars with the Vox. So a lot of the rhythm guitars that you hear on my music and on my backing tracks and my videos, if they're distorted, usually it's that, because what I find with rhythm guitars is that it doesn't matter too much if you use a tube amp or a solid state amp, unless you're going for something really specific. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but most of the time I just go solid state for my rhythm guitars. Since I am a big Black Sabbath fan, I do have a treble booster. It's not a range master, it's the Electro Harmonix Screaming Bird, and so I use that into channel 2 of the JTM45 because it's really fizzy and too bright in channel 1, but I don't use it very much because it only really does that one very specific, like Tony Iommi and also Judas Priest kind of guitar sound. Next to that is the Park Fuzz sound, which is made by Earthquaker Devices and branded with the Park logo. And what this is, for those who don't know, is it's a Tonebender Mark III clone, but they selected the components to have more gain than a usual Tonebender Mark III. So it's kind of cool because the Mark III had less gain than the Mark II, but the tone control makes it more versatile. And so since this is a high gain version of a Mark III, it kind of gets me into some Jimmy Page kind of territory with the Marshall, but again, with the tone control, it gives me more versatility. And then the Chromatic tuner, which I rarely ever use because Ableton has a tuner plugin that is super duper accurate. It's one of the most accurate tuners I've ever used. So even though the Boss Chromatic tuner is also one of the most accurate tuners I've ever used, I just don't really have a big use for it because I need to plug it into a power supply and plug it into my guitar, whereas I can just pull up the plugin in Ableton when I'm recording, which is most of what I do up here, and know if I'm in tune or not, because with the plugin I can use a microphone, which is amazing. So what I do when I give lessons here most of the time, since I also give lessons in this room, is I plug my guitar in here, and this cable goes into this AB box. So from this AB box I can either send it to an amplifier over there, or I can send it into this preamp, and this is the PreSonus Tube Pre V2, and I was honestly blown away when I got it because in all the pictures it looks like it's made of plastic, but it's all metal construction, and the tube overdrive feature, I was expecting it to sound like a cheap overdrive pedal, but it actually sounds reasonably good. It really makes a difference with bass. I don't hear much of a difference with guitars, so I just leave it at about 3 o'clock, and then I find the sweet spot on the gain control. And then it goes into the compressors, which are mostly just gain stages. I don't usually use them for compression, but they do that if I need them to. And then that goes into an input on the back of my interface. I usually don't use the preamps on my interface, although I have recently gotten back into doing that too for things where I need to do voiceover and play guitar at the same time, so my voice will go through all of this processing, and my guitar, whether it's a direct guitar or an amped guitar, goes into one of the preamps on the interface. And then for monitoring, I have two sources of monitors. I have my Audio-Technica headphones, I forget the model, it's like the M50X or something. It's the same ones that Reed Stefan uses in his videos, which is how I found out about them. And then my main monitors are the Callies, and in a minute I'll get into my room and why I don't think I'll ever use anything other than the Callies. But anyway, if you're looking to figure out what you want for monitors based on this video, I honestly would recommend the Audio-Technicas, because the Audio-Technicas cost about the same as just one of the Cali monitors, and they're very detailed. Like, when I first started listening on the Audio-Technicas, I started being able to hear the sound of the pick hitting my guitar strings before fully picking the strings, which is a sound I'd never heard before. So the Audio-Technicas are really detailed. I don't really have anything bad to say about them. It's just that most of the time if I'm up here in this room, I am using the Callies just because I feel like it's a little bit better for my ears not to have the speakers right in front of them. And also on back of the Callies, there's a series of switches to really tune them and EQ them to the room. So I've got it sounding pretty much identical here in my room as it sounds out in my car, and as a result I have not had to check my mixes in my car in almost a year. Like, if I get it sounding good in this room, most of the time it translates to everything. And that's really saying something because this room isn't treated, but I'm about to talk more about that. So, as I previously stated, this room is completely untreated. If I scan around with the camera, you will not see any acoustic treating, which is bad. I wish I had some acoustic treating in here because it can only help. But there are a few things about this room that make it about as naturally treated as it could possibly get for an untreated room. The first is that the carpet is very thick, and that gets rid of a lot of reflections immediately. If I were to drop my camera and clap in this room, there would be very little in the way of reflections, and I like a little bit of reflection anyway. As someone who's used to playing live, that's a sound that I'm very familiar with, and I know how to work around it in a mixing kind of situation, so that doesn't bother me too much. The other thing is that since there are these angles in the ceiling, it means that there are fewer corners in this room, and fewer corners means less bass traps. I don't get a big bass buildup in this room. And also fewer standing waves, since there's less parallel surfaces, because anything bouncing off the floor gets sucked up by the carpet instead of bouncing off the floor and the ceiling repeatedly. And since these walls are angled, you don't get a lot bouncing off one wall and off the other. The other thing is that even though there's a sliding glass door there that goes out to a second floor balcony, the curtains, while thin, I would like to get some thicker curtains at some point, do just enough to stop any major reflections coming off of the glass. Since I sit right next to it, it really helps out. So even though I don't have acoustic treatment, this room is about as good as it could possibly get without treatment. And so, yeah.